There is something happening in your brain right now that is working against everything you are trying to build. And I don't mean that metaphorically. I mean it in a very literal, electrochemical, measurable sense. Right now, if you've been scrolling, if you've been thinking about something you need to handle, if there's a low-grade tension sitting somewhere in your chest that you've gotten so used to you almost don't notice it anymore, your brain is running at a frequency that makes it neurologically impossible to access the part of your mind where real change actually happens. Not difficult, impossible. And no amount of effort, visualization, positive thinking, or repeating affirmations into a mirror is going to overcome that physics. I've spent years being confused by this. I'd do the work. I'd sit down and I'd visualize, I'd write things out, I'd say the right things, I'd read the right books, and something wasn't connecting. There was always this gap between the intention and the result, and I kept assuming the problem was the content, that I needed a better technique, a better script, a better method. But the problem was never the content. The problem was the carrier. The problem was the state I was in when I tried to do any of it. And when I finally understood what was actually happening in the brain during those moments, when I looked at the neurological data, not the motivational version of it, but the actual frequency data, everything clicked in a way that made me genuinely frustrated with how much time I'd wasted. Because this isn't esoteric, this isn't fringe, this is basic neuroscience that for some reason nobody puts together in a way that actually changes how you operate.
So today, that's what I'm doing. I'm going to explain exactly what's happening in your brain when you're in your normal, high-stress, get-things-done mode, why that state is the worst possible state for planting new beliefs, and then I'm going to show you a 2-minute technique that shifts everything before you ever sit down to visualize or affirm anything. And when you understand this, really understand it, not just intellectually, but in a way that makes you want to write it somewhere, the phrase that's going to start making sense to you, the phrase that you're going to want to put in the comments because it actually means something now, is this: I operate in the alpha state. Creation flows effortlessly. Not as a wish, as a description, as something that's actually true about how you function. Now let me show you why. Your brain is constantly generating electrical activity, billions of neurons firing in patterns, and those patterns have rhythms, and those rhythms have frequencies, and those frequencies are measurable. This is not new science. Hans Berger figured this out in 1929 when he built the first electroencephalograph and recorded human brain waves for the first time. He identified two primary states that he called alpha and beta, and what he found was that the brain shifts between these states depending on what the person was doing and, more importantly, how they were feeling. Beta waves are what you're in most of the time. They run at roughly 13 to 30 cycles per second. And in moderate doses, beta is exactly what you want. It's the frequency of active thought, of problem solving, of engagement with the world. When you're in a good rhythm at work, when you're having a focused conversation, when you're in a flow of productive activity, that's low to mid beta. That's healthy, that's functional. But here's where it turns on you.
When you add real stress, chronic stress, deadline stress, relationship stress, financial stress, the ambient undercurrent of modern life stress, beta doesn't stay moderate, it spikes. High beta, sometimes described as beta in the 20 to 30 hertz range. And at that frequency, something very specific happens in your biochemistry that has nothing to do with productivity and everything to do with survival. Your hypothalamus starts signaling your adrenal glands, cortisol gets released, adrenaline hits, your blood moves to your extremities, your digestion slows, your immune function downregulates, your prefrontal cortex, the part that handles long-term thinking, creativity, and what neuroscientists call goal-directed behavior, starts losing influence to your amygdala, which is the alarm system, the threat detector, the part of your brain that is only asking one question at all times: am I safe right now? This is not a metaphor. Bruce Lipton, a cell biologist at Stanford, spent years studying what happens to human cells under stress conditions, and what he found was that the same mechanism that makes a cell contract in the presence of a toxin operates at the whole body level in humans under chronic stress. The body literally goes into a protection mode that is structurally incompatible with growth. A cell cannot be in protection and growth simultaneously. Neither can you. And here's what I want you to sit with for a second, because this is where it starts to connect to everything you've ever tried and wondered why it didn't work the way you expected.
When you're in high beta, stressed, tense, agitated, in problem-solving mode, and you sit down to visualize your goals, to say your affirmations, to try to reprogram your subconscious toward a new reality, you are trying to install a software update on a system that is running in lockdown mode. The firewall is up, the gates are closed. Your conscious mind is working overtime, but the subconscious, where the actual operating programs live, where your beliefs about what's possible run as background processes all day, every day, is completely inaccessible. Not hard to access, inaccessible. And this is the part that frustrated me for a long time, because I kept thinking the effort was the answer. I kept thinking if I just believed harder, visualized more vividly, stayed more consistent with my practice, eventually it would break through. But that's not how the architecture works. You cannot force your way into the subconscious through willpower and repetition while you're in a stress state. You can repeat an affirmation 10,000 times at high beta, and the subconscious won't log it as an update. It'll log it as noise. Martin Seligman did work in the late 1960s that I still think about whenever I see someone pushing harder against a wall that won't move. He was studying learned helplessness, the phenomenon where animals and humans, after enough repeated exposure to outcomes they can't control, simply stop trying even when they're given the option to escape. And what struck me about his research wasn't the helplessness itself, but what it revealed about the nature of programming. The problem wasn't a lack of motivation. The animals weren't lazy. They had been conditioned into a belief at a level below conscious awareness, and no amount of surface-level change altered that belief, because the belief wasn't living at the surface. It was living deeper. It was baked into the pattern of response.
Your subconscious runs the same way. It holds patterns that were installed before you were 7 years old, patterns that got reinforced through repetition and emotional charge, patterns that determine how you respond to money, to relationships, to opportunity, to your own potential, automatically, without your conscious participation. And you cannot rewrite those patterns by working at the surface. You have to get underneath. That's what alpha does. Here's what I mean. Alpha waves run at 8 to 12 cycles per second. It's slower than beta, and that slowdown isn't passive. It's not just the absence of activity. It's a specific state with specific properties that make it neurologically distinct from anything happening above it. In alpha, the prefrontal cortex stays engaged, but the amygdala quiets down. The threat response dampens. Cortisol levels drop. And this is the critical part. The relationship between your conscious and subconscious mind changes. The filter that normally sits between them, the critical faculty that your conscious mind uses to evaluate and reject incoming information, becomes permeable. It relaxes. It opens. Joe Dispenza, who I want to separate from the hype for a second because his early work is genuinely grounded in neuroscience, has written extensively about this transition. He references the work of neuroscientist Karl Pribram, who described the relationship between conscious and subconscious processing in a way that maps almost perfectly to the alpha-beta boundary. The idea is that in beta, you're operating through the analytical filter. Everything that comes in gets interrogated. Your conscious mind asks, is this consistent with what I already believe? And if it isn't, it gets flagged, it gets resisted, it gets rejected before it ever reaches the level where belief actually lives.
In alpha, that filter softens. Information passes more directly into the subconscious. This is why hypnosis works. not because of mysticism, but because a skilled hypnotic induction is essentially a guided descent into alpha and theta, where the subconscious stops being gated and starts being directly writable. And this is also, and here's something that I find genuinely fascinating, why memory consolidation happens the way it does. The research on sleep and learning consistently shows that the most durable memories, the ones that move from short-term storage into long-term encoding, happen during the slower wave states. Your brain doesn't consolidate what matters to you while you're running hard. It consolidates it when it slows down. The learning that sticks is the learning that gets processed in a quieter frequency. Your subconscious is the same way. The beliefs that get planted are the ones that arrive when the door is open, not when it's being guarded. Now, let me push on something for a moment, because I think there's a comfortable story we tell ourselves about stress and focus that needs to be questioned directly. There's a cultural narrative, and it's especially strong in high-achieving, goal-oriented circles, that equates effort with progress. That the harder you're working, the more serious you are, the more stressed you are, the more you must be doing something meaningful. Stress has been rewired in our culture to feel like a sign of relevance. If you're not stressed, you're not trying hard enough. If you're calm, maybe you don't care enough. And I understand where that comes from, but I want to be precise about what it costs.
Because here's what's actually happening when you operate from that state chronically. You are spending enormous energy running a loop that produces the exact neurochemical signature your subconscious reads as danger. And when the subconscious reads danger, its one job, is to keep you from doing anything that deviates from what has kept you alive so far. It conserves, it contracts, it pulls toward the familiar. And the familiar, by definition, is not the new reality you're trying to build. You are not failing to manifest. I want to say that clearly. You are manifesting with extraordinary precision. You're manifesting the environment that matches the internal state you're broadcasting. If the internal state is high beta, cortisol-soaked, threat-activated, the external world that gets drawn to match it is going to reflect that frequency back at you, not as punishment, as a mirror. This is the part that's uncomfortable to really accept, because it puts the locus of the problem in the last place most people want to look. Andrew Huberman's lab at Stanford, and I want to be specific here because this research is relatively recent and the implications are significant, has published extensively on the neurological basis of stress-induced cognitive narrowing. One of the consistent findings is that sustained high stress states produce a measurable reduction in what's called default mode network activity. The default mode network is the part of your brain that activates when you're not focused on external tasks, when you're daydreaming, imagining futures, generating creative associations. It's the network that, for lack of a better word, builds possibility, and chronic stress suppresses it. Not sometimes, reliably. The biology of stress is structurally opposed to the biology of creative vision. So if you've ever wondered why your best ideas come in the shower, on a walk, right before you fall asleep, that's not coincidence. That's your brain briefly dropping into alpha and the default mode network coming back online, and suddenly the connections you couldn't make all day at your desk are just there, obvious, clear. You can make that state available on purpose. That's what I want to show you now. The technique is called coherent breathing. The name comes from the work of Dr. Richard Gurvitz and researcher Stephen Elliott, who did separate bodies of work that converged on the same discovery, that breathing at a specific rhythm, approximately 5 to 6 full breath cycles per minute, produces a state of physiological coherence that is directly associated with an alpha brainwave shift. Let me be specific about what coherence means here, because it's not just a nice word. When your breathing is at this rhythm, your heart rate variability, the beat-to-beat variation in your heart rate, moves into a synchronized pattern with your breath and your brainwave activity. This is measured, this is visible on an EEG. The heart, the breath, and the brain start operating in a coordinated frequency, and that coordination is the physiological signature of alpha. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. That's it. 5 in, 5 out. Continuous for 2 minutes. But there are two things about how you do this that change the effect completely, and I want to be precise because getting this wrong turns it into a relaxation exercise instead of a state shift.
First, the breath is diaphragmatic, not chest, not the shallow upper chest breathing that stress locks most people into, which keeps the sympathetic nervous system activated. You breathe from the belly. Your hand goes on your stomach, not your chest. Your stomach expands on the inhale, not your chest rising. This is not about lung capacity. It's about which branch of your autonomic nervous system you're activating. Diaphragmatic breathing specifically stimulates the vagus nerve, which runs the parasympathetic branch, the rest and restore system, and the downregulation of the sympathetic system that follows is the direct mechanism for the alpha shift. Second, there is no pause, no breath hold, no forced retention. The cycle is smooth and continuous. In for 5, out for 5. No gap. The continuity of the cycle is part of what creates the heart rate variability coherence. If you pause at the top of the inhale or the bottom of the exhale, you interrupt the rhythm that's doing the work. 2 minutes of this, that's all. 2 minutes before you do any visualization, any affirmation, any intentional mental work on the life you're building. What you'll notice, if you're paying attention, is a very specific shift in how your mind feels. Not sleepiness. This isn't a meditation technique that's supposed to make you drift off. It's a clarity that's different from alertness. It's what some researchers call relaxed focus. Your thoughts slow down, but they don't fog. You stop the reactive spin, the background calculation, the constant triage of tasks and worries. And in that slowing, there's an opening. That's not metaphorical either. That's the prefrontal cortex coming back online, the amygdala quieting, the filter between conscious and subconscious dropping its guard. That's the door. And here's what I want you to understand about that door. It swings both ways.
What you put into your mind in alpha doesn't just land differently. It lands permanently differently. The neuroplasticity research from Donald Hebb, his principle that neurons that fire together wire together, which he formulated in 1949, and which has been confirmed by imaging technology that Hebb never had access to, tells us that the strength of a neural connection is determined by the emotional and physiological state during which it was formed. High emotional charge, high physiological activation, the connection is strong. Calm, receptive, open state learning, the connection is deep. It's not better to be stressed when you're trying to install new beliefs. It's catastrophically worse. The reason the breathing matters so much isn't the breathing itself. The breathing is the key that unlocks the state. And the state is the environment in which every mental input either slides off the surface or gets wired into your operating system. So when I tell you to do your visualization after 2 minutes of coherent breathing, what I mean is you are not changing the content of your visualization. You are changing the neurological environment in which it's received. You're moving from a state where the subconscious is in lockdown to a state where it's open for update. The same image, the same feeling, the same intention lands completely differently in alpha than it does in high beta. Not somewhat differently, completely differently.
Michael Hutchison documented this extensively in Mega Brain, a book that I think deserves more attention in these conversations than it typically gets, because Hutchison was synthesizing research on altered states and cognitive performance before the biohacking vocabulary existed to describe it. His core finding was that the depth and durability of any mental reprogramming work is almost entirely a function of the brainwave state during the session, not the content of the session. Two people doing the same visualization exercise, one in high beta, one in alpha, are having completely different neurological experiences. One of them is talking to a wall, the other one is writing directly to disk. I want to close this loop I opened at the beginning. The reason I was stuck for so long with techniques that should have worked wasn't that the techniques were wrong, it was that I was bringing them to the wrong door. I was knocking on the front gate when the side entrance was 2 minutes of breathing away. And once I understood that, once I stopped trying to force my way through a gated system and started creating the conditions for the gate to open, everything that I'd been doing without results started producing results. Not because I'd found a new technique, because I'd finally understood the architecture I was working with. This is what it means to operate in a different state. Not to try harder, not to believe more intensely, to bring the system into the frequency where it can actually receive what you're giving it.
And there is something that happens to people who understand this at a level below the intellectual, who don't just know it as information, but know it as an experience they've had that's different from people who've just read about it. You start to notice when you're not in it. You start to feel the high beta in your chest before you consciously recognize the stress. And because you know what shifts it, 2 minutes becomes a tool you carry everywhere. Before a difficult conversation, before creative work, before you sleep, before you make a decision that matters. You stop operating from the default state of human adulthood, which is chronic low-grade survival mode masquerading as productivity, and you start operating from a place where the door is open, where the signal goes through, where what you intend actually has the neurological pathway to become real. There is a version of you that doesn't need to white-knuckle through the day to feel like you're doing enough. That version isn't a fantasy, it's a frequency, and you are 2 minutes away from it right now. Before you close this video, I want to give you something that isn't a summary. I don't want to recap what we covered. I want to install something instead. The next time you feel the tension rising, the grip in your jaw, the tightness in your shoulders, the thoughts that won't slow down, I want your body to already know what to do. Not because I told you, because you already understand now, at a level that can't be undone, what that state is costing you. You understand what's closed when the frequency is wrong. You understand what opens when it shifts. 5 seconds in, 5 seconds out. No pause. From the belly. 2 minutes. That's the whole thing. That's the entire technology. But it only works if the state precedes the intention. The state is not the preparation for the work. The state is the work. Everything else is just content arriving at a door that's already open or already closed.
You already know which door you want to stand at, so start there.